Thank you. Our guest tonight is a man on a mission. Would-be corporate crooks probably wish it was a mission to Mars. But they and everyone else should get used to the idea that William J. McDonough isn't going to go anywhere. At least not until he thinks his job is done, and that might take a while. Last June 11th, Bill became chairman and chief executive officer of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. If you don't know what the PCAOB does, you haven't been reading your Wall Street Journal or your congressional record. In short, Bill McDonough is that rare public official who says what he means. And as the accounting firms that he's overseeing can attest, he means what he says. That's why tonight should be so interesting, and why it's my pleasure to introduce the chairman and CEO of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, William J. McDonough.
Thank you very much, Miles, for that very kind introduction. It is a really great honor for me to address the Economic Club of Chicago and to return to the city where my wife and I spent so very many happy years and where I have so many members of my family still living. Chicago continues to impress me as the most American of the great American cities, one in which public pride is considered normal, and in which so many immigrant groups have found the American dream. Tonight, what I would like to discuss with you is that American dream, and my very real concern that it is in jeopardy. My definition of the American dream is that every American child, especially those of humble origins, truly believes that he or she can rise to the highest levels of our society. He or she can be President of the United States, Mayor of Chicago, a sports hero, a movie star, or the head of one of America's great companies, such as those represented here tonight. That American dream is intact and as strong as ever for all but the private business sector. I fear that the belief that the private business sector at the top levels is really open to all of our citizens and our immigrants is being questioned by many. And sadly, there is reason for that questioning. 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, the American market economy was the model for and the envy of the world. The marvelous flexibility of our economy, our belief that change is a good word, the constant striving for innovation were and are factors that make ours an economic system that compete with and beat any other. And yet, in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, the Congress of the United States and the President created a law that was revolutionary in the changes it prescribed and the activities it proscribed in our capital markets. Now, how could that have happened? I believe that it happened because in the course of the 1990s, many American business leaders got confused and their moral compasses stopped working. It is particularly sad that such confusion took place, because American businesses responded in the 1990s in a brilliant way to a very, very serious challenge. Globalization of the world economy became much more intense in the course of the decade, and American companies lost pricing power. It is easy to see why a manufacturing firm in Chicago cannot increase prices if it has to compete with firms in Mexico, China, India, and other countries with dramatically lower labor costs. But service firms discovered that they had the same problem. You cannot raise prices for, say, a call center in Naperville if you are competing with call centers in New Delhi. Only very local services, such as healthcare and legal services, have been immune from the globalization-driven loss of ability to raise prices. Now, if you cannot raise prices, And wage pressures are fairly intense because of the kind of the tight labor market we had in the 1990s. The only way to avoid funding the wage increases by reducing profits is to improve labor productivity, the output per unit of labor input. Labor productivity had averaged an increase of about 1.5% per year from 1973 to 1995, meaning that the economy could grow only slowly without putting strong pressures on resources and forcing inflation. One of the major tenets of post-World War II economic theory is that there is what I would call a speed limit on the economy. That speed limit is the sum of labor force participation growth, which is about 1% per year, and labor force productivity. So the speed limit from 1973 to 1995 was 2.5%. A different but related tenet is the relationship between employment and inflation, called by the mouthful of the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, or NAIRU. Most economists agreed that the NAIRU was 6%. An unemployment rate below that would bring inflation. And yet, in 1996 and later, the economy was growing at well above 2.5%, and employment kept heading down, eventually below 4%. Not even paranoid central bankers could see inflation anywhere. What had happened is that American businesses solved their problem of no pricing power but rising wages through investment in information technology to help them run their businesses more precisely. Now, investing in IT was just the beginning. What was really important is changing the way of doing business. A retail trade is an obvious example. In a modern store, you check out and the barcode goes ding and tells the clerk what each item costs and what your total bill is. But more importantly, the very same information system updates the inventory records and the order book when the inventory hits a level indicating it's time to order. What is saved compared to an earlier era is that you need no clerks with pencils keeping inventory records. You do not need warehouses of much size because we copied the Japanese just-in-time delivery system previously used only in manufacturing. And there is also a saving on the cost of financing now unneeded inventories. These and similar systems not only financed higher wages for those working, but increased profits substantially. Productivity at the national level went up from the 5% from 73 to 95 to 2.5% from 96 to 2000, and over 5% since then, including in the middle of a recession. This was a brilliant response by American business executives throughout our country. They deserved credit for it, but it perhaps helped in getting them confused. Pundits told them that it was a new economic era, and the excitement went to people's heads in a variety of ways. Two things especially stand out: executive compensation and the drive for ever-increasing and fully predictable quarterly profits. As Miles mentioned, the average large company chief executive officer in 1980 made 40 times more than the average employee in his or her firm. Now let's assume that that multiple made sense because of the extra preparation, the risk-taking ability, the leadership skills that CEOs really have to have. But by 2000, the multiple of the average CEO's pay over that of the average worker in the firm had risen, according to some studies, to 400 times, and in other studies to about 550 times. Now let's be conservative and use the 400 figure. That means that in the course of 20 years, the multiple of CEOs' pay went up by a factor of 10. There is no economic theory, however far-fetched, which can justify that increase. In my frequently stated view, it is also grotesquely immoral. In the earlier period, I think the most highly respected banker in America was Walter Wriston of Citibank. Walter Wriston never made as much as $1 million in any year in his entire career. Now, CEOs of major institutions make 20 million, 25 million. They ain't Walter Wriston, folks. Now let's look at earning performance. During the 1990s, there developed a theme in corporate America of predicting quarterly earnings, something accomplished by the people in the financial management of public companies guiding allegedly independent investment analysts to a consensus on how much the company would make in the next quarter. That morphed into a string of predictions of ever-rising quarterly profits. Now, there may be a time for some companies in which profits do go steadily upward, but the notion that it would go on indefinitely for lots of companies requires that you forget that there is a business cycle, a profit cycle, and the law of gravity. In this time of confusion, if a company made its forecast, the genius CEO, he or she of the 400 times the employee's income, was truly a genius. If the forecast was missed by underperforming by even a penny, the genius wasn't a genius anymore. He or she was a fool. And his or her tenure was questioned by the geniuses of the investment banking community and the financial press. What was really going on in response to this self-created situation was that companies were cooking the books with the help of outsiders such as lawyers, investment bankers, commercial bankers, and yes, accountants and auditors. The American people, that wise body politic which in times of national crisis has picked such great presidents as Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Harry Truman. No, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. American people were noticing this stuff and they didn't like it. But until the middle of 2000, everybody was enjoying the longest economic expansion in American history, and the public did not react. However, when the tech bubble broke in the second quarter of 2000, and the large stock market correction began and continued, the roughly half of American households invested in the stock market began to notice that their retirement plans and mutual funds were losing value. They were getting unhappy, but they were not sure whom to blame. The scandals let them know who to blame: corporate executives. Enron was not only managed by people of questionable integrity — the CFO is about to serve 10 years in jail — but people of such shocking selfishness that they sold their stock on insider information at the very same time that their employees' 401k plans were frozen. And lest anybody think it was just Enron, WorldCom, HealthSouth, and others, financial implosions were happening with sufficient rapidity to make the American people very, very angry. In a democracy, when citizen voters get angry, they let their elected representatives know just how angry they are. Congress and the White House responded with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, passed by overwhelming majorities in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and signed by a president who called it the most important securities legislation since 1934. Among the prescriptions of Sarbanes-Oxley, CEOs and chief financial officers have to sign the financial statements, personally certifying their accuracy. Now, some executives don't like that. That kind of makes me wonder what they thought their responsibilities were in the past. The accounting profession was deemed particularly culpable because of the blatant cooking of the books at the scandalous companies. Accountants lost their right to self-govern their profession, and the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board was created. Now let's stop for a moment and ask ourselves why the Congress and the President and the American people did not decide that the scandals were few in number, just bad apples in an otherwise happy, healthy business community. The reason, my friends, is above all else the executive greed, which was extraordinarily widespread, and the cooking the books phenomenon I described a moment ago. The American people thought that the business leadership in general, that's us, needed a sharp lesson. Now, you may think that you and your firm were and are among the holy innocents, and all of this Sarbanes-Oxley stuff is a bum rap. And frankly, you may be right, but it doesn't make a bit of difference. Sarbanes-Oxley is the law of the land for all of us. My impression is that many business executives think that this is a bad dream and it will soon go away. They are wrong. The American people are still angry, and the politicians know it. I am told by many friends on the Hill that their mail runs extremely heavy indeed from constituents raving mad about the continuing excesses of executive compensation. Quite a number of members of Congress have asked me if I think it is possible to legislate control of executive compensation. I tell them that I cannot figure out how you could do it, because each company is truly unique. But we should not kid ourselves. If the anger of the American people continues and business leaders do not wake up soon, I predict that there will be legislation. This is a democracy. When the people speak loudly and long enough, the Congress will respond. Another reminder that nothing has or is likely to change in the public attitude is the recent legislation by the House of Representatives on mutual fund reform. Congressman Richard Baker, a Republican of Louisiana, had been working for some time on a bill that would create much tougher rules for the mutual fund industry. When the scandal broke, his bill went through the Financial Services Committee like a shot and was passed by the entire House and sent to the Senate by the extraordinary margin of 418 in favor and 2 against. If that does not show where the American people are, nothing will. Now, what can be done can be shown by the example of the accounting profession. The accountants, long thought by the public to be among the most honorable professionals, so lost the confidence of the people that they now have the PCAOB and me as its chairman to oversee them, particularly in their audits of public companies. Since last October, no accounting firm can audit a publicly traded company if the accounting firm is not registered with the PCAOB, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. As of today, 771 have registered. We have the responsibility to inspect them once each year for the 8 largest firms that each audit more than 100 public companies, and once every 3 years for the smaller ones. Our inspectors look for a tone at the top. Do the leaders of the firms realize that the audit is their most important product? Are good auditors rewarded for being good auditors or for something else, like bringing in collateral business? Are they getting the message of this new ethic down the line to even their newest employees? Last fall, we conduct limited inspections of the 4 largest accounting firms. The inspections actually began last summer, before the big 4 accounting firms had to be inspected by us legally. They volunteered to do it, which I think showed very good judgment on their part. We looked particularly at some of the individual audits conducted by the firm to see if they were well done, according to the securities laws, the rules of the SEC and the PCAOB, and perhaps more importantly, the highest professional standards. In the annual inspection starting this year, we will look at many of their audit engagements. I can assure you that our inspectors are seasoned professionals and very, very tough-minded in the public interest. When our inspectors find that which should not be there, we have very broad enforcement powers, the greatest being the power to deregister an accounting firm and put it out of the audit business if that is appropriate. And in addition to triggering our enforcement process, our inspectors will also tell us when auditing standards may be insufficient or unclear. That will help us as we set new audit standards, which we want to be sound as well as reasonable. Our relationship with the accounting firms encompasses more than just their audit activity. We are their supervisors in the same way that the Federal Reserve, the controller of the currency, and the state banking official here in Illinois supervise banks. As president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, a big part of my job was banking supervision. I also chaired the International Committee of Banking Supervisors, the Basel Committee. My approach to my current job is to treat the accountants exactly the way I treated the bankers. I will know your business and support you actively and openly if you are doing the right thing. If you do not do the right thing, and especially if illegal conduct is involved, I will come down on you with the full power of the law, and you will sincerely wish you had not done it. We have told the accountants that they have to restore the faith of the American people in their profession. And that will be done sooner and better if they run their firms in a way aimed at just that, restoring public confidence. We also have to tell them that if they do not do it themselves, we representing the public will make them do it. A very unpleasant alternative. My impression as of now is that the accountants are opting for the do-it-yourselves and do-it-ourselves and see the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board as an ally. And if I'm right, that shows very good judgment. Now, most of us here, including me, by the way, are not accountants. So what should we be doing? Well, let's start with executive compensation. Has there been any progress? Maybe there's not much left to do. The answer is no. A recent Towers Parent study has CEO pay at 500 times that of the average worker. 2003 was a pretty good year, it appears. A survey by the National Association of Corporate Directors showed that 66% of corporate boards rated themselves below par in regulating executive pay. Now, if I were a CEO of a public company, I would ask my board's compensation committee to do a serious study of the appropriate level of my CEO pay. Now, when I say a serious study, I specifically do not mean the kinds of studies done in the 1990s. Let me describe a fictional one of those, but sadly one that is quite typical. I, the CEO, hire a compensation consultant who tells me that I am the most brilliant CEO in America. Well, how in the world does he know that? We just met. Well, he knows that because I just hired him. So I have to be a very smart guy. He tells me, and in due course my directors, that I must be paid in the top quartile of a group of companies chosen by the consultant, which just happened to pay a lot. As mentioned, all the kids in Lake Wobegon were above average, and all the CEOs who hired executive compensation aren't just above average, they have to be in the top quartile. That kind of ratchets up pay. It's very silly, but it was also unconscionable. Now let's assume that this new and serious study reveals that the CEO is being paid too much. Well, I suppose that the CEO could have a temper tantrum and leave in a big huff because the directors want to reduce his or her pay. And in that event, good riddance. I would turn to the directors and point out that there are lots of fine people in America, many of them in this room, who would be happy to be CEOs at a more rational level of income. A lot of very attractive young people in this room. I see CEO potential everywhere. Getting away from the quarterly earnings prediction is equally important, but it will take even more guts from business leaders. It is necessary not just for legal and moral reasons, but because a very good recent academic study shows quite convincingly what you already know, that the concentration on short-term earnings is leading American managements to concentrate on the short term at the expense of the longer-term strategic interests of the firm and therefore of its shareholders. Disappointing the markets occasionally for the greater long-term performance should be seen as good. We will need enough CEOs and their boards, preferably of the very strongest companies, who will inform the world that they are going to run their companies and wish to be judged on performance over time, not just yesterday or tomorrow. Now, lots of silly people will howl that it will be impossible to judge performance, and it may take a while before the markets will adjust to a new, more rational management approach. But we must take the risk and move in that direction. People like me can only encourage it. Private business leaders will have to show the courage to actually do it. I said at the beginning of my remarks that I feared the American dream is in danger. I think that because the loss of confidence in private sector leaders by the American people can be restored only if we convince them once again that the private sector at the top is not a closed club of people guided by their own selfishness and greed and their own interests. If the American public does not regain that confidence, it is likely that they will turn to government more widely and more actively. In countries in Europe, which we consider in many ways like the United States, the government is much more involved because their societies want it that way. The share of government in gross domestic product is in many cases twice as large as it is here. Such a development would not, in my opinion, be in the interests of the American people. But it is up to you, to us, to make sure it does not happen. If we don't do anything, it will. Is there some compass which might guide us? I think there is. My friend Kofi Annan, in accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, pointed out that at the center of all of the great religions is responsibility of each person for others. Responsibility to others is at the very heart of the Torah. In Christianity, it is dramatized in the Gospel of Matthew, when a Pharisee asked Jesus, which is the greatest of the commandments? He answered that there were two. The first is that we should adore the Lord our God. The second, equal to the first, is that we must love our neighbors as ourselves. Does a CEO making 400 or 500 times more than the average person who works for him or her not consider fellow workers neighbors? When we think of the community around us, are not those less fortunate than we, the homeless, the orphan, the uneducated, our neighbors? What, after all, is the biggest difference between any of us and some vagrant we might see on a cold street corner on the way home tonight? My answer is that I was luckier. And so rather looking at that person and thinking, what a hotshot I am, my answer is, there but for the grace of God, go I. That person is my neighbor. If once a week when we are at the place of worship of our choice or just sitting and thinking, would we not be better people and better leaders if we examined ourselves along something like this line? In the last week, has everything I have done been moral as opposed perhaps to legal, but just within the limits of the law? In the next week, will everything I do be morally sound? We do not need theologians to guide us. Loving our neighbors as ourselves is more than enough guidance, and it's quite readily understandable. If we should follow, all of us, good moral and ethical practices, the American dream will be restored in all its glory for the good of all. Thank you.